morning. Thank you for joining us on our devotional journey through the book of Revelation. And this morning we're going to be in Revelation chapter 12. So we are moving right along, aren't we? Last time, as we finished chapter 11, we were taking a look at the two witnesses. And we said that these were two Jewish men who were sent down from heaven for the sole purpose of preaching the gospel. We saw where the 144,000 had preached the gospel, and now these two witnesses are sent down. And I was saying that I believe they are Moses and Elijah. I won't get into that here, but that's my personal belief, that they are sent by God, and for a period of time they are empowered by God and protected by God while they preach the gospel. The Antichrist and the evil people of the earth would love nothing more than to shut them up, but they can't. And there's a revival going on, and many are coming to faith in Christ because of the preaching of these two witnesses, these two prophets of God. And though the time comes when their mission is complete, and so while the Antichrist would have loved to have killed them from the very beginning, he couldn't because they were protected. But there comes this time where that shield, if you will, that hand of God is taken off of them, and he does indeed kill them. And as you read there in the last part of chapter 11, their bodies are left to lie in the streets for 3.5 days, and they are ridiculed. There's a mockery made of them. The people of this earth who hated their preaching will come around and just say terrible things about them. And then an amazing thing happens after 3.5 days of their bodies lying in the street. They are resurrected and caught up. There's a lot of catching up that goes on in the book of Revelation, isn't there? In the very beginning, John is caught up to heaven where he sees this whole vision that is the book of Revelation. And then we, the church, are caught up in the rapture. And now we see these two witnesses are caught up into heaven. In a little bit, we're going to see where the 144,000 are also caught up into heaven. So a lot of catching up goes on in the book of Revelation. But as we come to chapter 12, as I said last time, we're now in the middle of the 7-year tribulation. This is that point where it becomes what Scripture calls the Great Tribulation, or rather it intensifies beyond anything you've seen as of yet. And so we're about to see that Satan is going to be revealed for who he really is. The old serpent slithering in the grass is now going to take on the form of the lion, prowling about, roaring, and seeking to devour. And there will be no mistaking from this point forward who is behind all of this and who he is. And so Satan is going to be cast down. He's going to empower the Antichrist, demonic empowerment, and the world's going to begin to recognize what's going on. And so the deception of the Antichrist and the deception of Satan are going to be revealed for what they really are. And so with chapter 12, things really get rough moving forward for the last half of the tribulation period. But that's where we are. And so as we come to chapter 12 today, there's a lot of symbolism in this chapter. And so there are some characters that play, and I'm going to try to identify who they are so we know what we're talking about. And so I'm going to walk us verse by verse through chapter 12, and I'll identify who at least I believe to be the characters involved here. And then I'm going to make some practical applications, some takeaways for us to use as we move forward today. So chapter 12 begins. It says, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars." You say, well, who is that? Well, I believe that's Israel. That's a picture of Israel. Verse 2 introduces a second character. It says, "And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain, to give birth." Well, who did this woman give birth to? I believe that's a picture of the 144,000. Those are those Jewish men that early in the tribulation period are converted to Christianity, and they are protected by God. Remember, they received that seal in their forehead so that the Antichrist can't touch them. He'd like to kill them. He'd like to shut them up. But they go everywhere preaching the gospel, and they cannot be stopped. Even when those creatures are let loose from the abyss that we looked at last time, they can't harm them because they're protected by God. They've got a mission, and their mission is to preach the gospel. And so this is basically a picture of those 144,000 out of Israel. That's the imagery of being born out of the woman. They come out of Israel. They're Jewish men. Some say they are literally 144,000, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. Others suggest that that's a figurative number, that it simply means there's a lot of them, lots and lots of them, who go everywhere preaching the gospel. So this is a picture of that occurrence. Now we're introduced to the third character, and that's in verse 3. It says, "Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems or crowns." But you know who that character is, don't you? And it's none other than Satan himself. "And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child." This is a picture of the hatred that Satan has for Israel, and also for these 144,000 Jewish men who are going everywhere preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, and many are coming to Christ. And so he would like to devour them. But notice what happens in verse 5. It says, "And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne." So here's another catching up or a catching away. It's at this point that the mission of the 144,000 is complete, and so they are caught up to heaven. And we'll see them a little later in our study. We'll see them there in heaven around the throne. And so rather than allow Satan to destroy them, the Lord steps in and catches them away. Well, this infuriates the old dragon, Satan, and so he's going to turn his wrath somewhere. And if he can't devour them, those 144,000, if he can't devour them, he's going to turn on the woman, Israel. And that's where this drama unfolds in verse 6, where he says, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. You go do the math, and interestingly enough, you'll find out that 1,260 days is 3.5 years. So basically what we see here is that Israel will flee. 144,000 are caught up. But this part of Israel flees from Jerusalem because the Antichrist is turning his wrath against them. And they flee to a place that is known as modern-day Jordan. In Bible times, it would have been Moab and Edom. But it's modern-day Jordan, we believe near Amman, Jordan, and they're protected by God. So that's what's going on in those first 6 verses of Revelation chapter 12. Well, when this is going on, there's this war in the heavens. And so look what happens in verse 7. It says, "There was a war in heaven, Michael, one of the archangels, and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven." Wow. "And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Man, I can remember my dad used to teach and preach on the book of Revelation. When he would get to this part, he'd get happy, as the old saints used to say. And he would talk about how Lucifer, that beautiful angel, had been in the very presence of God in the celestial heaven, but because of the rebellion had been thrown down into the atmospheric heavens and became the ruler of this world, and how that here in this picture, this same dragon is thrown down yet again, this time from the atmospheric heavens down to the earth. And then my daddy would get excited and he'd say, and that old dragon's going to get thrown down one more time down into the abyss before it's all over with. And we're going to see all of that in our journey together. But here in verse 9, we see where Michael and these angels of God defeat Satan and his angels, and they are cast out of the heavens down to the earth. Well, at this point, if he didn't know it before, Satan knows that his days are numbered. And guess what happens in heaven at this point? Verse 10, there is this eruption of joy and celebration because this old devil, this old dragon has been cast out of the heavens. He no longer has access to accuse the brethren before God, and his days are numbered. And so it says there was a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of the brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. And so there's rejoicing in heaven because Satan has now been thrown out of heaven completely and he's on the earth. But watch this. He said, rejoice, you heavens. But then he says, woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has come down to you. Wow. Having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the man-child. So there's a war in heaven. He's defeated and he's cast down to earth, and he's going after Israel. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the man-child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman. What is that about? Well, apparently God supernaturally helps Israel escape Jerusalem, escape the Antichrist, escape the devil, and flee to this place I was referring to earlier, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, that place that has been designated for her, where she was nourished for a time and times and a half a time, or 3.5 years, from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman. Many believe that's a reference to the armies of the Antichrist, of his kingdom, who are pursuing her across the desert toward this place of protection. Verse 16, but the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. Probably reference to an earthquake or something, and the earth opens up and these armies of the Antichrist are defeated, they're destroyed. So the dragon, verse 17, was enraged with the woman, Israel, and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Again, you say, what's that about? Well, apparently what appears to be happening there is that when Satan, who has now demonically empowered the Antichrist, realizes that he can't go after the 144,000 because God has caught them up, he's raptured them. When he then tries to go after the nation of Israel, those who have fled to the wilderness to hide out, in other words, the Antichrist has broken his covenant with them. They realize now he's not the man of peace, he's the man of war. And so they flee for their lives, and Satan goes after them. But then the earth swallows up the armies of the Antichrist. And so now Satan realizes he can't go after them. He's enraged. Who's he going to go after? He turns back toward Jerusalem, and he goes after that remnant, if you will. This is most likely, this final verse we just looked at, most likely a reference to Jews in Jerusalem who heard the preaching of the 144,000 and placed their faith in Christ. And they stayed there. They're protected by the word of their testimony and the blood of Christ. And they stay in Jerusalem. And so the Antichrist now turns and goes back to Jerusalem, where he's going to go and make war against them. I'm telling you, if some movie producer could get a hold of this stuff, it'd be a blockbuster. It just plays out like this unbelievable drama. And it's real, folks. It's real, and it's going to happen, just like his word says it's going to happen. And so next time we'll be in chapter 13, and we'll see what happens next. But before we go today, I just want to give you a couple of takeaways from all of this. A lot of symbolism in these scriptures that I've read to you today. But I wanted to paint this picture and let you kind of see, at least from my perspective, who these individuals, who these characters are in this drama that's unfolding. But just a couple of takeaways for us as we live our lives here and now. And the first one is this. Let me just say this. The struggle is real, okay? I'm going to say it like that. The struggle is real. Make no mistake about it. We are at war. I mean, if you wonder why all this stuff is going on around us today, we've got this worldwide pandemic. And right on the heels of that, you've got potential economic collapse. And then behind that, there comes all of this unrest and rioting and looting. So much that's going on, and a lot of questions out there. What's going on? Well, make no mistake about it. The struggle is real. And the struggle is that we are in a battle. We are in a war. That's why Ephesians 6:11 and 12 says this, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. The devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So make no mistake about it. There is a battle raging. There is a war going on. And we're reading here in the book of Revelation about the war of all wars, the battle of all battles. That's coming. But in the meantime, we're already at war. We are already in a battle for our lives. And so just know that. If you wonder why things just don't seem to always work out like you think they should, if you wonder why it seems like everything's falling apart all around you, let me just remind you, the struggle is real. So don't be alarmed, don't be dismayed, don't be surprised when these things come, because we are at war. So the first takeaway is the struggle is real. The second takeaway is this: our enemy is Satan. Okay? Our enemy is Satan. And I say that today because sometimes we get all kind of confused about who the enemy is. And we get to thinking that other folks in the church are our enemy. I never seem to be to so many churches where Christians are fighting against Christians. You got it all wrong. They're not your enemy. They're your brothers and your sisters. Or we get the notion that other churches are the enemy. Well, it's that denomination over there. They don't think like we do, and they don't believe like we do. They're the enemy. No, they're not your enemy. They're not the enemy. Or we think, well, the sinners out there, they're the enemy. They don't believe like we believe, and they're they're not the enemy. Make no mistake, the old devil would like nothing more than to get you distracted fighting the wrong enemy. The struggle is real, but secondly, the enemy is Satan. That's why 1 Peter 5:8 says this: be self-controlled and alert. Open your eyes, church. Be alert. Your enemy is as plain as it gets, the devil. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. It doesn't get any plainer than that. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. Let me tell you what I see happening in the world today. This old enemy has been slithering around like a slimy snake for centuries. But in these last days, I believe the snake is going to rear his head and get up on his hind legs and start roaring like a lion. Do you see that happening today? It's like it's unashamed. I mean, evil is so clear in our day, and it's like the snake has become the lion overnight and roaring like a mighty lion. And look at what he says there in that passage, 1 Peter 5:8-9. He says, resist him and stand firm in the faith. So takeaway number one, the struggle is real. Takeaway number two, the enemy is Satan. And here's the third takeaway, is Jesus will fight for us. He'll protect us. He'll deliver us. Just like in the passage we read today, he supernaturally protected his own. Well, guess what? He's going to look after me and you too. In 2 Thessalonians 3:3, he says this: but the Lord is faithful. He will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. Isn't that beautiful? What a promise. He will strengthen you. Anybody feel weak this morning? You feel like you can't go on? Are you just exhausted from the drama, all that's going on around us in these days? Well, he will strengthen you. But not only that, he will protect you from the evil one. What a word of encouragement. And I hope you'll hang on to those thoughts as you go through today and the days to come, that the struggle is real, The enemy is Satan, and the Lord will protect us.